there. It's Gary Parrish. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Eye on College Basketball Podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. Matt Norlander is here with me. So is Cal Boone. If you're watching on YouTube, you know what to do to the like button. Shouts to Brandon Davies. And if you're not subscribed to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel already, please also do that while you're here. Let's get into it. We wanted to bring Strongjaw in to join us today because he's still in Chicago, where he's been attending the NBA Draft Combine. That's where most of the best prospects in the world gathered this week to measure, test, talk, and in some cases, you won't believe this, even play basketball. Edey was in attendance. He's the two-time and reigning National Player of the Year. So, KB, let's start there. Did Zach Edey help himself or hurt himself this week? Was it a good week for the Purdue legend?
It was a good week for the Purdue legend. Yes. The biggest man at the NBA Draft Combine was Zach Edey last year. The biggest man at the NBA Draft Combine this year is, again, Zach Edey. And believe it or not, he actually measured a half-inch taller than last year, which was like just, okay, sure. He had a faster lane agility time than other center prospects like Alex Sarr, who could be the number one overall pick, Yves Missi, Donovan Clingan, all of whom are 7-footers or somewhere thereabouts and projected as top 20 picks. He ran a 3/4 court sprint in a good time and looked like Mr. Larson and Happy Gilmore while doing it, which I think was just fantastic. And, you know, there's the scene where he chases shooters like, I will get you, shooter.
I believe that's Mr. Gilmore's.
I believe that's Mr. Gilmore's. And, of course, he got memed, which was fantastic. And actually, the girl who posted the clip, Kristen Peak, talked with her yesterday, and she said she talked to Zach Edey about it. He was a good sport about it, and I think Edey was even just kind of joking with her, saying that, you know, maybe he has a new Halloween costume for this year. So thought it was great, and I think overall this week Zach Edey helped his stock in a real way. And, you know, there's going to be questions probably about his agility still, despite, you know, testing fairly well. There's going to be questions about his shooting ability because he didn't shoot the 3-ball at Purdue. But I think for the most part, he won over some people this week, and it will help his draft stock as we go towards kind of the final section of the pre-draft process here.
Norlander, do you know where you're at on Zach Edey as an NBA player? It's been discussed and debated, I guess, for multiple years now. In 3 years, are you a believer that Zach Edey is going to be a player who matters in the NBA?
That matters. Good way of putting it there. Define matters. How would you put
he is,
around that?
He is a important rotation player for a team that is competing for something postseason.
I think he eventually gets there. I happen to believe in Edey, and at 7'4", two-time National Player of the Year, although a very, very different kind of player. We went through this 6 years ago, with Jalen Brunson, who was the National Player of the Year at Villanova and won a national champion, won 2 of them actually. But the year that he won National Player of the Year, you know, part of that 2017-18 Villanova championship team. And we talked about it in the pod. I wrote about it. It just seemed to me that he had done so much, and his translatable skills were obvious. Not that Brunson would be one of the 5 best players in his draft class, which he's obviously become. He's become even better than that. But that he should have, what he had proven had, to me, established himself as a top 20 pick in that draft. He went to the second round. Edey, although again, very, very different player, different skill set. I think that he has a place in the NBA, and I think that he will eventually be an impactful player and someone that matters. But I'll be fascinated to see once we get to draft night where he winds up going and what team takes a chance on him and how they opt to use him. Boone, from the ground there, what you gather is the buzz on his realistic draft range? You know, now that the combine's done and all this stuff is completed, now he'll have pro day and all this kind of stuff. There's still going to be more, obviously, but what do you gather is the realistic range now for a guy who was the best player in his sport the past 2 seasons and is coming off a year in which he averaged 25 and 12, took his team to the national title game, and shot 62% from the field.
Yeah, I feel like for the most part with Zach Edey, there's two sides of the spectrum, and he's so polarizing that either like you believe this dude is a lottery pick and he's going to be just as dominant in the NBA as he was in college, or his game is not going to translate. He's back to the basket type style. His defense, is maybe going to not translate as well because his slow foot speed. I think it's probably somewhere in between. In talking with people this week, like he's going to end up probably, I've thought for a while now that he'll end up going in the first round. I still believe that's probably the case, somewhere in like 20 to 35 range, and probably closer to 20 than 35. If he's able to make shots at a reasonable level from 3-point range and like actually be a threat, then I think you have like a real NBA rotation caliber center. And that's pretty valuable, especially in a class that a lot of people are really, really down on, really from top to bottom. If you can get someone who can be a rotation piece in the 20s, I think there's real value there. And obviously, given Edey's credentials, he was the best player in college basketball the last 2 years. He's very unique in terms of him being the biggest man in this NBA draft class. His defense has been very, very impactful for Purdue. So I think at some point, some NBA team is going to talk themselves into just seeing what happens with Zach Edey. Like, obviously, he could bust, and there's a real chance just because guys with his size and that profile the way that he does, guys like that all the time don't typically work out. But I think someone is going to talk themselves into Zach Edey like in the 20s, and that's probably where I think his draft stock is right now.
I have him in the 20s in my latest mock draft. I would look at him higher. I'm intrigued. Norlander, I like the Jalen Brunson comparison. I haven't heard anybody else make this. I think it works well because with Brunson, you're exactly right. One at a high level, 2 national championships, National Player of the Year. Everything you're seeing him do right now while leading the Knicks at this point to within a game of the Eastern Conference Finals, all that stuff was visible in college. It's just you didn't believe, or at least most people didn't believe, it would translate to the NBA. But you look back on it now and you're like, well, okay, if it was all there. With Edey, and I said this earlier in the week, I believe somewhere else, but with Edey, it's going to be a similar deal where if he goes to the NBA and he works, like he outperforms his draft slot, you know what people will say? Well, we saw him do this for 2 years in college basketball. You just didn't believe it would translate, but it was all there right in front of you. All you had to do was look at it and believe in it. And then if it doesn't pop, if he is everything his skeptics say that he is, then it'll be like, well, of course. I mean, he was an incredible college basketball player, but that's not how the game is played at this level. We knew in college he couldn't move the way you need to move to play that position consistently in the NBA. So if you believed in him as a lottery pick, you were just talking yourself into something that was never going to make much sense. I think you can look back in either one of those things. People will say either one of those things, depending on how this thing goes. I'm with the group that thinks the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I think he's going to be a relevant NBA player, but there are going to be times, I don't care how he moves his feet at the combine, there's going to be times where he just gets played off the court, probably in the postseason. You just got to be willing to deal with that because you desire all the other stuff he can bring to the table. But there are going to be moments in playoff games if he's a rotation player for a playoff team, there will be moments where I don't know that you can keep him on the court.
Yeah, I think there's probably something to that. But I'd take a top 20 pick on him, unquestionably. He's established enough. He's 7'4", and he has not even been playing competitive basketball for a decade to this point in his life. Is an astute learner, a sharp mind, and I think that he will find a way to make it work. I think it is critical that he gets drafted to a team that wants to use him and knows how to use him and has a staff that can deploy him correctly. But I think that he's got a really good chance at averaging, call it 10-8, 12-8. And if you're doing that and you can say that you're going to make a second contract in the NBA, you're unquestionably worth a top 20 pick. I don't know if he'll go top 20. I'm on the record here definitively. I would have him in the top 20 no matter what. He's proven too much and had his size. I think that's undeniable, and he will be an impactful player in the NBA.
Kentucky reserves, Reed Sheppard and Rob Dillingham were also at the combine. We learned at least two things about them. One, Reed Sheppard can jump higher than most realize, and Rob Dillingham is shorter than most realize. Strong jaw. Let's start with Sheppard. I love him. I believe in him. Do people also love and believe in him? The ones you were talking to at the combine this week.
Yeah, I think actually people around Chicago were buzzing, crediting you with discovering Reed Sheppard.
I did do that.
And I know that you're very humble in letting everyone know that is the case. He's fantastic. Tied for first in the max vertical jump this week. Did not expect that to happen. 42 inches, measured nearly 6'2". So strong kind of measurables across the board. Great athletic leaping ability. Like that was unexpected and surprising and great in terms of like his favor for Reed Sheppard. I think if you probably had odds on would Reed Sheppard out jump Bronny James, for example, it'd be like plus 10,000 coming into the week or something. But he did exactly that. Same vertical jump as, guys like Devin Carter. And we're talking about like one of the best shooters in college basketball last season as a true freshman for Kentucky. His defense is like, he's a legitimate defensive playmaker. He's very like high IQ, self-aware, checks like so many boxes and feels like one of the safest prospects in this draft. Like, I don't think I would take him number 2, but I don't think it's crazy to think that in this class, just because it is so weak, that he ends up going number 2. There's like real potential with him that not only is going to be a safe prospect, but like he has some untapped potential, some upside that maybe we didn't totally see a lot at Kentucky. He's a really good playmaker. Like he can play multiple positions. So yeah, testing well, measuring well. Obviously he's going to, do his interviews, and I think is a very likable person. So all in all, I think a very good week for Reed Sheppard.
Norlander, here's where I'm at on Reed Sheppard. I'm not going to sit here and insist there's no way Stephon Castle will be a better NBA player than Reed Sheppard, because you start saying stuff like that, you end up sounding stupid. Here's what I will say. I would take him number 2 in this draft. And the only player I know for sure I would take before him is Alex Sarr. I don't know there's any other guy available that I would take before Reed Sheppard. Can you join me? Can you join me in being that high?
I can't join you that enthusiastically just yet. This was a very interesting week for Reed Sheppard in this regard. And talking to, I don't know, close to a half dozen NBA people since the season ended, basically, and just kind of, checking on little this, little that, and you talk about some of the bigger players. Reed Sheppard was a guy who a few people I talked to were pretty convinced that the measurables and the combine and potentially the pro day, and he'll have his specific pro day next week in LA. Those things would work against him, and he would need to rely on a lot of, the tape from college, everything in college. He's going to pass the interviews, obviously, with flying colors. All that comes from a great family. I wrote a huge feature on him earlier this year. May well end up writing something else on Sheppard before we get out of here to draft night. But the notion going into the combine was that, his measurables and the way that he was going to test probably were not going to help him. And it might lead to this slide where instead of Reed Sheppard being talked about as a top 3 pick, we might get to draft night and teams that are actually on the board to take him, he falls to 10, 11, 12, 13. Doesn't seem likely now anymore. So that's just a little peek behind the curtain of some presumptions that were being made about Sheppard that I don't think will wind up coming true there. I don't know if I take him 2. Excellent shooter, tremendous instincts. I mean, part of why I wanted to write about him earlier this season wasn't just because he was a really good player. It was watching him play. When you watch Kentucky play, for all of the excitement last season and the disappointment, the alchemy was different when he was on the floor. He has certain anticipatory habits that I think very few other players in this draft or in general that have come into the NBA out of college in the past half decade have. He just feels like he's going to work, but you can't deny that he's not a huge He's not a huge player. He's got an incredible vertically, but his physicality on the court, that's not there if you watch the games. He has good instincts. He has really quick hands. He's a really good shooter. Can he sustain and have the performance and value of a top 3 pick in a draft, given what he'll be asked to do and what the NBA is? That I'm intrigued by. I'm not sold on Reed Sheppard should be a top 3 pick in this draft. I think you'd be a little crazy to let him fall past 6, but I do think the combine helped him more than the average person might realize, because I think a lot of people were thinking like he was just going to be just okay. And it turns out, KB, speak more to this, obviously, that he helped his reputation out even more than some were thinking.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, when you do this standing vertical jump and you're 42-inch, measuring it, 6'2", I think you laid that out nicely. Like the context of, he's obviously going to shoot it well. People think he's going to interview well. People did not really expect that he would test particularly well. And so, yeah, when he tests as like one of the best athletes at the NBA draft combine, it's kind of wheels up for Reed Sheppard. So, I think he's kind of locked himself in probably as a top 5 pick in this class. And maybe that doesn't say as much about him because this is kind of a weaker class, but you have some confidence projecting Reed Sheppard. You know exactly what he's going to be as a playmaker, as a shooter, as a defender, from what we saw at Kentucky. And then it feels like there's some upside too, because he does have the athleticism. He checks kind of all those boxes. So definitely helped himself this week in Chicago, a little bit more so than maybe his teammate Rob Dillingham.
Yeah, I'll keep it simple and then we'll move on. Like, what if I told you the best shooter in the draft is also a good athlete? And he could play on or off the ball, and he's the son of 2, accomplished basketball players. Like, what are we talking about?
Yep.
Maybe we can start debating ceilings, like how good can he be? But I'm a believer. Like I think he's going to be the type of player where he's going to work in the NBA, and you'll look back in college and people will say, well, he shot above 50% from the field and above 50% from 3. Like, I don't know why he was coming off Kentucky's bench, but like, he was an awesome college basketball player when he was on the court. And you shouldn't be surprised that he's an awesome professional basketball player as well. Like, I'm a big believer in Reed Sheppard. We'll see let me ask you this real quick, because I've heard some other people say it. Some people and it comes up where I live because the Grizzlies are picking 9th and people trying to figure out who's going to be available at 9. How many people in this draft would you 100%, and I mean 100%, say there's no way they're there at 9? Alex Sarr obviously starts that list. It seems like the number is lower this year than most years in terms of people you can 100% eliminate from dropping all the way to 9. In other words, I think Reed Sheppard should go 2. I could also see him go 9.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say Sarr's not going to be there. Stephon Castle will not be there. Mm-hmm. Zachary Richache will not be there. I think that in some order, they will probably all be top 3, definitely out of the top 5. Nikola Topic from Serbia, I think will not be there, but that's probably the list. I think that's probably it.
It's pretty fascinating, KB. If it's just 4, so it's no more than 4. That actually it speaks to the weak. Keep going. Obviously, speaks to the weakness of the draft, but also some valid intrigue that we could have those uncertainties. By the way, we're saying this on May 17th. You and I both know. We all know that when we get to June 17th, there's going to be at least a consensus on a 5th player. It may well be Sheppard, to be honest. But even still today, I find it interesting that he's not there.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have Reed Sheppard, you're going to have Modest Bazelis, you're going to have Donovan Clingan, Ron Holland. Like, all of those guys could end up going higher than expected, but like their range right now, like they could go anywhere from 3 to 10. They could fall to the Grizzlies at 9. So yeah, like the top of this class, I'm pretty high on it. Like, I actually like some of the guys that you could get at, number 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. Just from studying this class, but it's not like a consensus by any means. It's not Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller. Like, it's Alex Sarr, then Stephon Castle, Rob Dillingham. Like, it's kind of choose your flavor, who you want to take a gamble on. No one has really kind of separated themselves from the rest of the pack in the top 10.
What real quick, we didn't touch Dillingham. What wasn't a fruitful week one for him? For folks checking in that weren't paying attention to the combine, what's the quick scouting report on Sheppard's teammate?
Yeah, not a great week for him. I thought it was his media stuff was very good, very insightful, fun to talk with, but measurables didn't come out great. 6'1" without shoes, shorter than expected. I think probably people who follow the draft closely, it's not terribly surprising, but 164.2 pounds, pretty light, not great. And then a +2 wingspan at 6'3". He's just a little bit smaller than maybe people had hoped. Obviously, he's got some wiggle and jiggle to his game that is very exciting. It's very electric. I think people are probably looking for star power in this draft and reaching a little bit and thinking like, hey, I've seen this guy play. Rob Dillingham looks kind of like, if you squint a little bit, you see some shades of Kyrie Irving in his game. But certainly, I think the measurables did not help him. The fact that his wingspan is basically the same size as his height is not great either. And there's questions about his defense, and he kind of acknowledged that in his media availability this week. And the fact that his wingspan is only 6'3", he's a little bit smaller. There's going to continue to probably be questions about his defense. And yeah, so like it probably didn't terribly hurt his stock overall, but I don't think it necessarily helped his stock either. If he came into the combine and measured like 6'3.5" or 6'4" without shoes, maybe we're talking about Rob Dillingham kind of pushing his way into like the top 3 or top 4. Now it's still just as unclear kind of as we started combine week. This is a guy who's still kind of a little bit of a mystery box in terms of what he could be. And NBA teams, I think, are going to, obviously do some digging and try and figure out, because the measurables just not particularly appealing.
Yeah, I'm not out on Rob Dillingham, but just like I was talking about Reed Sheppard, if you just say, hey, he's a good athlete who's maybe the best shooter in the draft, and he can play on or off the ball, like, what are we arguing about? I think that's a simple, obviously simple, but like a good way to describe Reed Sheppard. If you do the same thing with Rob Dillingham and I go, he's a little guard who can't guard his position, what are we talking about? Like that, if we look up in a year or two and we go, I mean, he was always little and he never guarded, and now it's hard for him to stay on the court in an NBA game. I'm not necessarily a believer in that, but man, I can see how we're talking about that in 2 years.
Yeah, I think Dillingham was he was a joy to watch play at Kentucky this past season. And obviously there's a bit of irony to the fact that we're talking about 2 Kentucky players in the top 10 conversation who didn't even start. He has a way about him in terms of making plays, scoring, getting to the hoop, but bigger, faster, stronger players now at the next level. I understand the skepticism. He's not going to fall out of the lottery, very well might not fall out of the top 10, but there are some things working against him. I think he absolutely needs to go to the right spot with the right staff to allow him to be a chance to be an impactful role player at the NBA level. But we'll see. I would imagine, I think there was a little bit of top 4 buzz with Dillingham over the past 4 to 8 weeks. I just personally cannot possibly get there. He's got more offensive reliability to his game than Stephon Castle, but Castle can and will play defense, and you can clearly see how Castle's going to grow into a player that if he hits his ceiling on that end of the floor is going to be like a top 15 defender in the NBA, and general managers are just going to bank on that more than an undersized guard who's really good at getting to the 10 and finding up and under. So that's just one skill set is going to give you much more reliability than the other. So I would be surprised personally if we see Dillingham going to the top 5.
I do think Dillingham is a little bit like Edey in the sense that whatever franchise selects him, you better have a coaching staff that believes in him and is willing to deal with the stuff that is going to be obviously problematic in order to get the good stuff. You got to be willing to take the bad with the good, or else the good, you don't ever get to get that at all. Mm-hmm. And so if you draft Rob Dillingham and suddenly he's on your roster, you got to have a coaching staff who's going to, yes, try to develop him, all that stuff, but deal with the fact that he's going to get targeted and hunted very early in his career a lot. And if you want to enjoy all the obviously great stuff he can bring you on the offensive end. You're going to have to live with the defensive stuff, perhaps for his entire career, but especially early. So it goes without saying with most prospects, where you land and how you are handled early in your career plays a big impact, a big role in whether or not you make it or not, or live up to expectations or not. But I think it's especially true for somebody like Rob Dillingham. I want to ask you, KB, about Alex Karaban, because if it wasn't a great week for Dillingham, it seemed like it was a pretty good week for another UConn player. We could watch all 5 of these dudes end up in the NBA who started for the Huskies in the national championship game. We'll talk about that next, but first, let's get a word from our partner.
The PBR World Finals continue Saturday on CBS Sports Network.
Time to get up now.
So KB, Dan Hurley has said that Alex Karaban's NBA draft decision is pretty straightforward. If he's projected as a first-round pick, he's probably going to go. If he's not, he's probably coming back to UConn. After this week in Chicago, how at risk is UConn of losing Alex Karaban?
Legitimately 50-50, I would say. He had a really good week. I talked to a scout last night who said he's one of the only couple of prospects who's like legitimately on the fence, like unsure about whether he stays in the NBA draft or whether he goes back. He could obviously get a bag and go back to UConn and cash in a big way with NIL, but there's a real chance that he played his way like into the late first round. And that was probably not the case coming into the week. He was great in the shooting drills, first in the 3-point shooting star drill, first in the shooting off the dribble drill, first in the side, middle side shooting drill. Just totally lit it up. He looked really good in the scrimmage setting of the NBA draft combine. He looked like he belonged, looked very comfortable, confident. He looked like one of the more vital pieces of a UConn team that just won a national championship and, was the best team in college basketball. So we'll see. We'll see. I think the consensus kind of in this draft is there's probably not going to be a ton of guaranteed deals in the second round this year. So I do think he's probably looking for a first round guarantee, like a promise, because he wants guaranteed money. That's the case with a lot of prospects. And as such, there's probably not going to be a lot of guaranteed deals because there's only, 30 spots or whatever. But the fact that he played so well, shot so well, looked so well this week, I think it's very possible that UConn ends up losing Alex Karaban.
He was 21 of 25 in the 3-point shooting drill on day one. Like you said, he scrimmaged well. Norlander, if Alex Karaban remains in this draft and UConn then is losing all 5 starters, how much does that negatively impact their three-peat aspirations?
I think it significantly negatively impacts UConn's aspirations on winning a 3rd straight title. I think bringing Karaban back is vital to that cause. Again, let's just acknowledge that we're talking about a program trying to win 3 in a row in 2025, man. In this environment in college basketball, it's insane that UConn's even in this discussion after all the talent it's guaranteed to lose for the 2nd straight season. But I do think Karaban returning is pretty damn vital. Without him, I would be close to a 0% heading into the season, even with the best coach in the sport running that program, because that's just so much to overcome. And at the very least, the lines of communication are entirely clear and perfectly open between Karaban, Hurley, and that coaching staff. Because I talked to Hurley about this a month ago, maybe. But he was like, "We'll be on Karaban watch. If he's first round, he's definitely gone. If it's 30 to 40, then we'll have an interesting conversation. If it's 40 or lower, then we know we'll have him back." It's hard for me to see how he goes lower than 40. But if he feels like his range, and really like Karaban, his camp, like that's going to be such a hard thing to actually get a gauge on, guys, 5-6 weeks out from the draft, because teams that are picking at 32 and 35 and 39, they're only going to tell you so much, because for as much as they might value you in that spot, they will be valuing another 2, 3, or 4 players. It's just the reality of how this goes. And then at a certain point, you are taking a chance. And if you're going to stick in this draft and you're not convinced you're going to be a first round pick, but you'll go somewhere 31 to 40, well, is it going to be the right kind of spot that you're going to? Karaban is a man with a lot of very intriguing options here. And I'd like to see him back. If he does come back, I think it'd be only fair for us to have him somewhere preseason for second, third team All-America status if he does return. And if he does return, that gives UConn obviously viability as a preseason top 5 team the whole way down the line. But he is one of the very few players right now that has a decision in front of him that has big picture impacts on the sport of college basketball. There's only a few other players like that. I think Coleman Hawkins, depending on where he goes, is another one of those players. But Karaban is the most well-known among them, considering his status as a 2-time national champ.
Yeah, I think he's the biggest player that remains undecided. Maybe Mark Sears. I should say Mark Sears
is also big, but Bama will be a preseason. In my opinion, Bama, I know you don't have him there, GP.
No, I
probably would put Bama top 5 even without Sears on the roster. And I think you've got him outside of that. Like, they're still going to have a chance to win a national championship. If he's there, you might have him number 1.
Yeah, let me check right now. I've got Alabama at number 9 without Mark Sears. With him, I would have him perhaps all the way up to number 2. I don't think I'm going to get him ahead of Kansas, but I think I could get him probably all the way up to number 2. So Mark Sears is obviously a big undecided player out there. Alex Karaban is as well. Simply, I would never bet against Dan Hurley in anything because he's made a bunch of people look wrong over the past couple of years. He's amazing, but obviously losing a 5th starter would be very difficult to overcome. I'd still have UConn as a preseason top 15, maybe even top 10 team. But right now I've got UConn at number 4, and I would not keep them there if Karaban isn't on the roster. Real quick, KB, I didn't plan to ask you about this, but since it came up, Mark Sears, what do you hear on him?
Yeah, he had a solid week. Not spectacular. That would be kind of my recap. He had some moments where it's like, oh yeah, I see the Jalen Brunson comps. This seems like that kind of checks out. He looks just like Jalen Brunson kind of when he's on the floor in scrimmages. He had some moments where he looked good. He plays well off 2 feet. Like he's very savvy. Didn't stand out, I would necessarily say. And so I think he has a tough decision to make. I don't think he's a first round pick. I think, again, I talked to the scout last night about some prospects who are like trying to make a decision on whether to stay or go. He was one that popped up that's like, if you want to go back to college and, really cash in on NIL, like a lot of prospects probably could and maybe will. He's one of them that I think probably has a realistic chance of doing that. Not necessarily someone who I think would be like getting a guaranteed contract if he stays in the NBA draft based off this week. I don't think he necessarily hurt his stock, but didn't really help his stock either. So, I think if I'm projecting him ahead, it depends on what he wants to do. Obviously, if he wants to just leave college and start his pro career, that's up to him. But I think, if I were advising him, I would say more likely than not, his best chance is probably maybe going back to college.
I agree. I think I think Sears goes back personally. I think that he winds up going back and in the process makes Alabama tried and true Final Four preseason contender.
The initial intel I had, heading into the national championship game, was that he is probably gone, and I've just left it there, and I'll just leave it there until he says otherwise or indicates otherwise. But it's not hard to imagine him coming back, and if he comes back, Alabama is the clear favorite in the SEC and among the candidates to do a back-to-back Final Four. They'll be excellent. I am under the impression that you can't talk about the NBA Draft Combine without mentioning Bronny James. So we'll have a short Bronny James conversation next. But first, let's get one more word from our partners.
When you need the sports news anywhere,
we've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
What's up, Amanda, Jacqueline, Hassel, Messy?
If you're listening to the pod, that was the YouTube version, just so we're clear.
No, I like for it to always be confusing.
Okay.
I want people to have no idea.
Hold on. You want the pod to get more confusing? I'm all aboard that. You want more chaos?
What up, Knuckles?
Let's go.
What up, Knuckles?
We've gone 35 minutes and haven't talked about Scotty Scheffler getting arrested this morning, by the way.
What a wild deal. Turns out you can't run over police officers in cars, apparently. What a wild
I thought this was America. I thought this was America.
I thought this was America.
Oh my
There
gosh.
is nothing more. Like, I woke up and it's the first thing I see, and I'm like, am I awake? Is this real? Like, Scotty Scheffler getting arrested for anything is so low on the list of things I imagined I'd wake up to.
I was bringing my kids to school, and KB's up against us, so we got to get out of here soon. But I was bringing my kids to school, and I got a text from one of my buddies, Scotty Scheffler arrested wild. And I'm like, what? And then I dropped him off. I came back, and then the Twitter feed's absolutely flooded. And I see the mugshot, and I'm like, this is instantly legendary. What in the world, man? Just wild.
As like in this moment, it's 8:36 Central, 9:36 Eastern on Friday. Scotty Scheffler has been detained, arrested, booked, mugshot,
Charged, yes.
yeah, and made it back to the golf course. He reportedly walked into the golf course and saw the dining crew and was like, "Good morning, everybody."
It's amazing. Oh my God. How about the fact that Jeff Darlington, who primarily does NFL stuff for ESPN, just happened to be there when it was all happening and looked at Scheffler looked at Darlington and just said, "Please help me.
Please help me.
Please help me." What?
Please help me.
Wow. I do need to mention that all of this even happened because there was a tragedy at the golf course. Like a pedestrian was evidently killed by a moving vehicle, and so because of this, if you're listening now, you're aware of a lot of the details there. But good God, man, the fact that Scotty Scheffler, who by the way just became a father,
yes,
look with all of this stuff. This is, hey, Dad, what do you remember about when I was born? This photo, son. That's what I remember.
Like, he just had a kid. Somebody said, man, any father knows having babies will make you go crazy. Scotty Scheffler arrested a week into it.
I had to bring it up because I believe one of the three of us have actually been detained in the back of a police car on this podcast. I think, right?
I have never been arrested. I have been detained.
Yeah, you have been detained.
Yeah, but I was freed. I was freed because I did nothing wrong.
You didn't get Schefflered. All right.
I did not get Sheppard. I was freed.
Yeah. Yeah, we've told that story multiple times on the pod before. Yeah. Boone, you've never been detained?
I've never been detained. No.
I have also never been detained. Let's talk Bronny James here. We did a segment on him on the previous pod, previous pod earlier this week, but he continues to be, and understandably and rightfully so, a big talking point over the viability of his future. Our colleague Bill Ryder wrote a detailed column on what he saw from Bronny James at the Combine earlier this week, in which he basically laid out how he could see a pathway to Bronny James finding his way to making it in the NBA. Remains to be seen. Obviously, the evidence GP and KB is not there from a production standpoint, but Boone, the floor is yours. Any and all thoughts on what you saw from Bronny, and if you think he will be drafted, should he be drafted? What do you got here? What did you see out there in Chicago with Bronny?
Yeah, he started the week probably behind the 8 ball, I would say. Measured at 6'1.5" without shoes, which I believe he was listed at 6'4" at USC. So I think that probably caught some people off guard. People who have covered Bronny for a long time weren't terribly surprised by that. I think for a long time, it's like every couple of weeks, there's like, a Ball is Life tweet like, "Oh, Bronny James is now 6'12". Oh my goodness. Like he hit a growth spurt. That was not the case. And so it was kind of nice to get kind of a level set and actually get his measurements at 6'1.5". Good, not great. But he performed well. He got really hot in the 3-point shooting star drill, ended up finishing second place in that drill. The first day of scrimmages, I thought he looked like he belonged. He didn't stand out necessarily. He struggled shooting from the floor, was 2 of 8, had 3 turnovers, no assist. But just kind of watching him, I thought he looked like he belonged on the floor. And then the second day, the final day of scrimmages, he really stood out. LeBron was there, and Savannah was there. And that's basically all I watched for like 20 minutes was just LeBron eating a salad behind me. But he brought his own lunch, which was amazing.
It's a power move. I respect it.
Yeah. So that was fantastic. Just very interesting to watch LeBron James, like 12 feet away from me, just eating a salad. Bronny James was good in that game, though. Like he was very aggressive in getting to his spots, hit a nice little pull-up jumper, hit a catch and shoot, corner three. He made like a nice little dive to the basket and a little pocket pass to a cutting teammate for an assist. After which, of course, I'm standing and watching LeBron James from 5 feet away. And I hear, good pass, which was amazing. He's got that voice that just like kind of shakes your core. That's my go. So that was cool to see. I think he played pretty well overall. And the fact that he was very cerebral in his media availability, which was really the first in a really, really long time.
Truly the first in his career, KB, by the way. He had never really had done anything like that ever before.
Which is weird,
yes.
by the way.
It is weird, but good to see that he handled it well.
Yes, he's done like some press stuff like previously, like I think 2 or 3, but in this setting, this was like his first true media availability. And people are literally tripping over themselves trying to get questions into Bronny James. And I think he handled it really well. Just basically talking about, like, of course, people are asking, hey, what's it going to be like to play with your dad in the NBA? Have you thought about playing with your dad in the NBA? And, whether he's PR trained or not, I think he answered it very well, which was like, look, I have not really thought about it. I want to be in the NBA, obviously. I want to be in the NBA with my dad, obviously. But I want to be known like as my own entity, as Bronny James, not as LeBron James's oldest son. And the way he handled that, I think, was really impressive. There's a lot of attention around him, a lot of scrutiny around him. People have hot takes about Bronny because he's Bronny. And a lot of people are interested in kind of hearing what he has to say and the analysis around him. But he handled it, I think, very well and showed out in a way at the combine that, like, if he gets drafted, and I do think he will get drafted, I don't think he will be drafted solely based on the fact that he is LeBron James's oldest son. Like, I think he played in a way where we have to take him seriously as a prospect. I think that has long been the case. I've been kind of screaming against the wall into the abyss for that to be true, because I think a lot of people don't think that he's a real NBA prospect, but I really think he is. And he validated as much this week. He's a guy who I think will end up being drafted. Had some very good max vertical jump, ended up finishing like tied for 7th in the max vertical jump, shot it well, played well on defense, like checked a lot of boxes. And so you'll probably see a lot of Bronny James combine coverage this week because it's Bronny James, but I think it's warranted. He had a really good week in Chicago.
So I want to be clear here. Even if it is obvious to the entire world, hey, I know there's been a lot of speculation, but just so you know, you're not getting LeBron James. He's going to stay and play with the Lakers. But if you want to draft Bronny, he'll be happy to join your franchise. Under those circumstances, do you still believe another franchise besides LA would use a pick on Bronny James?
I think that is possible. Yes. Now, I don't know exactly what LeBron's camp is going to think of that. Like, if LeBron's camp is just like, hey, stay away from Bronny. Like, we want to steer Bronny to LA, and we're gonna use our leverage, our force to make that happen. Like, then I don't think he's going to be drafted, but I do think that NBA teams are going to take him seriously as a prospect. And I think LeBron will probably be hands-off on this, as hands-off as he could be, because he does not want to hold his son back. Like, put yourself in LeBron's shoes. Do you want to kind of steer your kid to only play with the Lakers and then eliminate 30 different teams from potentially considering him? Like, probably not. He probably is a normal dad who wants the best for his son, and the best for his son is probably for NBA teams to take him seriously. So, there's a lot of theories in Chicago this week, like, should the Oklahoma City Thunder take him because they have a great developmental program, and LeBron has talked up Sam Presti and kind of that franchise. Should the Jazz take him? I know Kristen Peak reported that maybe they're considering him with one of their picks. So I think there's a lot of different avenues this way could go with Bronny.
Norlander, let me ask you this, and then we can get out of here, because I think KB touched on something interesting there. I know there's some thought that maybe Clutch or LeBron or some combination might do exactly what Kyle pointed out, which is, hey, NBA franchises other than the Lakers, stay away from Bronny. We want him in LA with his dad. If I'm LeBron, I actually wouldn't do that, because I would, if another NBA franchise legitimately wants my son with a second round pick, I think it is so much, the narrative is just so much better surrounding Bronny. Like this franchise took Bronny James.
So validates him.
It validates him. Not to get LeBron, not because there's any, they really do believe in him as an NBA prospect and they wanted to use a pick on him. I think that changes the entire narrative around Bronny, as opposed to nobody picked him, so the Lakers just put him on a two-way. It is what it is. I would, if I'm LeBron, the thing I want more than anything else is probably for another NBA franchise to take my son, independent of anything that has to do with me.
I said this earlier this week. I don't think it's a good situation for Bronny James to be on the Lakers and be on that bench with his father, probably playing in the G League. I also don't believe that Bronny James, KB and I will disagree on this. There's not enough there for me right now to say Bronny James is worthy of being drafted. But if he does, I will understand why. One, the combine actually genuinely helped his stock. Unquestionably, he did better for himself this week. And that was it was the biggest looming speculation of anything with any player the entire week was what Bronny James would do at the combine. And then I think there is something viable to be said about when you look at across sports and how many athletes who had fathers, parents that played professional sports before them. Yes, it does matter that he comes from who he comes from. That is an actual impact. I will not discount that. I do think he would have been better by returning to college basketball, whatever. We talked about earlier this week. I'm not gonna do a coda on that overall. I appreciate KB's insights on that. And it was nice to see that he did step up and perform well. And he, for the most part, I guess, tested pretty well as well. Where he winds up going will be very fascinating. In talking to some folks, I think some teams will not have him on their board. He will not be anywhere near the top 60 as a prospect. It's a matter of, will there be 4, 6, 8 teams that are picking in that second round that actually do wind up going and picking him there? I will be interested in that. We are up against the clock, but hold on real quick before KB gets out of here and heads to the airport. Anyone else? Like, I know Devin Carter, who I find to be super fast. I think Devin Carter has a chance to be a top 10 player in this draft. Him, anyone, like 3, 4, 5 guys, KB, that you saw the past few days that to you, good, bad, or otherwise, kind of stuck out most. Give us a quick notebook dump.
Yeah, Devin Carter was one that is on my list. Broke the NBA Draft Combine record with an all-time record of 3/4 court sprint of 2.87 seconds, matched Reed Sheppard's 42-inch max vert. He was very good. Justin Edwards, I thought, played fairly well this week. It's a guy who we had at number 1 on the CBS Sports Big Board coming into the season. Did not live up to expectations, but I think looked like he belonged this week in scrimmages. And you know, he's a guy who probably in years past would have simply not competed in scrimmages. So it was nice to see him playing. Trenton Flowers and AJ Johnson, I thought, looked really well. 2 young players. Played overseas last year. I think they looked really good in scrimmages. Baylor Shireman from Creighton, I think, really helped his stock. He was very good on both ends of the floor in the scrimmage setting, scoring the basketball, passing, defending, did a lot of different things, and I think it kind of opened some eyes for people. And then finally, KJ Simpson from Colorado, had a great max vertical jump, was obviously, we know he's very athletic, but he was very aggressive in the scrimmages, and maybe scrimmage setting, it favors guys who have the ball in their hands. And he looked very comfortable and confident, when he had the ball in his hands. But I think he really helped himself in a real way. I'll have some winners and losers up later on CBSSports.com. So this is kind of like a short notebook dump for me. But if you want to check the full list, that will probably be out by the time this podcast drops.
You can find it at CBSSports.com. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Shouts to Terry Teagle. He's a legend. Huck Larnell. Thank you guys once again for watching, listening to the Eye on College Basketball podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, Apple, Spotify. There's more of us than there are of them. That needs to be reflected in the comments. KB, appreciate you joining us. Get to the airport. Do not, if there's a police barricade, Do whatever they say. If they say stop,
I'm going around, baby.
stop.
I'm
I
going
assume
around.
he's not driving, by the way. You don't have a rental car, do you? We got an Uber? What are we doing? What's the situation here?
No, it's an Uber, but I'm
Yeah.
going to instruct my Uber to go around. If a police officer attaches himself, he will regret that.
Be
It's gonna be
careful.
detaching.
Be careful, KB. Be careful. We'll talk to you again real soon. Till then, take care.